Hey folks, how's everyone doing? It's that time. It's time again for another session of Getting to Know Dynatrace. My name's David Jones. Everyone calls me Jonesy. Feel free. We're going to be walking you through a demonstration of Dynatrace today. We have our guest sales engineer, Brendan Steiner. Brendan, how you doing?
Very well. Thanks for having me, Jonesy. Happy to
Oh,
be
it's a
here.
pleasure to have you. A pleasure. So, folks, with these sessions, what makes getting to know Dynatrace so special are your questions. So, this is meant to be a very interactive session. And so, what we want to do is we want to open up the chat systems into however you're watching us today. If you're watching us on LinkedIn, or if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube or Twitch, whatever it might be, feel free to type in a question, and we'll do our best to see if we can't answer those questions as we're going through. But with getting to know Dynatrace, there's a couple of things that we like to do beforehand. First off, I'm coming to you, if you've seen this before, you can tell I'm not in my regular studio office. I'm actually remote. I'm out here in Denver, Colorado, where Dynatrace a couple of months ago, we opened up a new office out here in Denver. And, the interesting thing about this is that this brand new office, we've got a really young crowd that's working here. There's a lot of vibrancy, a lot of energy going on. And, if you're ever interested in finding out more about employment opportunities here at Dynatrace, please feel free to go to dynatrace.com/careers and have a look for any of the open positions. We are in fact actually hiring. So if you're interested in working for a fabulous organization that is at the cutting edge of observability, Dynatrace might be the place for you. So keep that in mind. Now let's get into the actual getting to know Dynatrace session. So usually what I do here is I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And then I'm going to flip into a presentation that we got here. Whoa, let's go presentation mode. There we go. With getting to know Dynatrace, we have a couple of segments that we like to do. The first one is what's new. So what is new here at Dynatrace? Well, this has been for Dynatrace a very exciting week. This week, Dynatrace was named a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And so this is something that, we have actually been represented on the Gartner Magic Quadrant in the leaders category for about 13 consecutive years. We're very excited about this. So if you want to find out more information about this particular announcement, you can go to the Dynatrace blog site, and there are a number of articles about that. As a matter of fact, this is where you go to find what's new, what's going on at Dynatrace. And the Dynatrace blog is real simple. You basically dynatrace.com/blog. And there's all sorts of super interesting things that we're talking about. For example, let me just sort of actually scroll into the blog, talk about a couple of the different articles here. Obviously, the most exciting one this week is this Gartner Magic Quadrant, us being named a leader. But you'll notice that we also have a bunch of other really interesting articles that I highly recommend that you give them a read. For example, this has been in the news lately, the MOVEit vulnerability. And so we actually have a blog article that talks about how observability can, context can fill the gaps from that MOVEit transfer vulnerability. This is super interesting, super timely article about something that's really been impacting a lot of organizations. And remember, when we talk about observability here at Dynatrace, we're not talking about observability in terms of those traditional EPM use cases, but we also talk about it in the context of AppSec use cases as well. And this is a perfect example of how the Dynatrace platform can help you get a better understanding as to how that MOVEit vulnerability might be impacting your organization. And if we keep going through here, there's interesting articles about in this particular case, and this one is mind blower, honestly. Our CTO, Bernd Greifenator, he wrote an article that talks about how Chat GPT and generative AI can be enhanced by the causal AI that Dynatrace offers. So this is a really super interesting article. Again, I highly recommend that you give that a read. And you can go through here in our blog, and you can see all of the different things that we that we post up. For example, if you didn't know this, if you're new to getting to know Dynatrace, we actually release a new version of Dynatrace. For our SaaS platform, it happens every 2 weeks. For our managed or on-premise platform, it happens every month. And here's an example of some release notes for the latest release for Dynatrace Managed. But then there's other articles here on how to, automate predictive capacity management with Davis for workflows, how OpenTelemetry logs in Grail unlocks full observability. And we can just keep going through this list. There's just article after article in our blog about all sorts of interesting things related to Dynatrace and observability and how it provides business value. So folks, let's get back into our presentation. Let's move on to the next segment. And let me just start this up again. And the next segment is before we get there, let's actually take a moment to talk about Perform 2024. So folks, it's that time of year. We're going to start talking about Perform. Perform is the annual user conference for Dynatrace, and we hold it in Las Vegas. This year, we have some exciting news. We have a new venue. We're going to be we'll be having this at the Aria Hotel, and I think we actually have a little promo that we're going to run right now. So let's see if we can't get that promo to run. Perfect. So folks, listen, if you've never attended a Perform conference, I highly, highly recommend it. These sessions are just amazing. We start off with typically a day and a half, 2 days worth of hands-on training. So you can literally sign up and get, hands-on training on exactly how you want to use different capabilities within the Dynatrace platform. Those are some of our most well-attended sessions. The feedback that we get every year from the hands-on training is always spectacular. In addition to that, we have an amazing set of guest speakers that will tell us all about the different aspects of business value that people are getting from the Dynatrace platform. So I cannot recommend highly enough that you attend, if you can, the Perform conference. And this year, 2024, going to be at the Aria Hotel in Las Vegas. So let's move on to the next segment, which is Did You Know? Did you know? This is the segment where we actually throw in little pieces of information that you may not be aware of with the Dynatrace platform. This one is now, did you know that Dynatrace provides what we call a site reliability guardian? So in the past, we used the term quality gates, and we thought quality gate, that's a really interesting sort of way of describing the capabilities that we provide, but it didn't really accurately reflect all of the different use cases that you could use these quality gates for. And hence why we released this new capability of Site Reliability Guardians. The Site Reliability Guardians, they provide an automated change impact analysis that really sort of validates your availability, your performance, your capacity objectives across various systems. It works in combination with our SLO capabilities. This is something that has been recently released. You'll actually see that within the new platform. So keep an eye open for that, your Site Reliability Guardians. These are things that are specifically designed for the SRE community. And so if you're an SRE and if your roles are all about the actual reliability of your applications, this is exactly the type of functionality that's going to make your life easier. So folks, that's this section of Did You Know? Did you know that Dynatrace provides Site Reliability Guardians? Give it a look. Now we're off into the best part of getting to know Dynatrace, which is the demo session. And so today, as we mentioned, our guest sales engineer is Brendan Steiner. So Brendan, how about we turn things over to you and let's get you started.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jonesy. And as Jonesy said, feel free to drop any questions in the chat. Definitely want this to be as interactive and as useful as possible. Of course, we're going to go over the basics of Dynatrace, but we also want to show off the new UI. As Jonesy mentioned, there's a lot of new stuff going on, a lot of changes. A lot of stuff stayed the same, and we're rolling over slowly. So just want to make sure everyone's comfortable in what they're seeing and gets to know Dynatrace. So without further ado, I'll just give a brief explanation of how exactly we monitor. So if you're familiar with Dynatrace, you'll be quite aware of the one agent. And the reason we call it the one agent is because you don't need to specify the technology. So we pick and drop that one agent and put that on a server, a container, even a Lambda function. We can do it through an operator, and that's going to automatically deploy and get all of your infrastructure metrics, all of your application metrics, and really make this cool smartscape. This is where I like to start because it has a nice visualization of how Dynatrace actually works. So say if I click on this data center West Europe, as I know it has a lot of hosts here, and you can see we've deployed into an Azure region with 3 Linux hosts, 3 Windows hosts, as well as a plethora of Azure functions. Now, of course, if this was AWS or GCP, they would show up here as well. So we're really cloud agnostic and work with all the hypervisors to make sure that we're collecting all of the proper observability information and getting all of the context that we need. Because that's really what makes Dynatrace different. Is all of the data that comes in is not correlated, but is put together in context. And I'll show that a little later on as well. But this mind map really shows, okay, we've got 3 Linux hosts that are running, Tomcat processes, Go processes, other types of technologies, and they feed up into application services, which feed up into an application. So we have this hierarchy that Dynatrace does automatically. So, once we install the agent, we've got it on the host level. And as soon as you do those restarts, we do the bytecode injection to get the real deep observability data. So, this really helps with interdependency mapping. Say, if I click on the services here, it creates this giant spider web that really, if I zoom in here and just click on this middle here, so we've got requests going to some unmonitored hosts. Let's click on one that is monitored. So we've got different technologies that it's feeding into, different technologies that are communicating into that. And you're really able to understand your application, whereas before it may have been a black box and you're not sure how to, get all your interdependencies laid out and move it into microservices into the cloud or refactor your application. This greatly helps with that, as well as even an asset library, say inside of ServiceNow or CMDB, you could actually populate that with the data coming from Dynatrace. So, that's just a brief explanation of, us installing the one agent, how we capture the data, and what Dynatrace is doing with it. So we try to make it as little configuration as possible. So you're more focused on the data and, the value that can come from analyzing that data.
Hey, Brendan, let's just take a moment to stop because that there's a lot of really interesting things that you sort of teased out of there. The first one was this whole concept of a CMDB. So, folks, CMDBs are, as Brendan mentioned, you could think of it almost like an asset library. And often CMDBs, you need to feed it information about what you have within your deployment. With Dynatrace, there's actually, for ServiceNow in particular, there's something called a service graph connector. And what it does is it actually connects into the Dynatrace topology API. And all of these relationships, all of these different entities that Brendan's showing you right here, it's going to suck that in and it's going to pull that information into ServiceNow and create a fresh list of CIs within their CMDB. And because this information is being discovered in near real time, you're always going to constantly have a fresh list of CIs within that CMDB. But here's what's super interesting, and I honestly, a couple of weeks ago, somebody someone on a colleague of ours, Michael Ferguson, was and another colleague of ours, Carl Adet, was showing me some examples of how you can use DQL, Dynatrace query language, to actually query the entity structure within our topology model. And you can use this for all sorts of different use cases. If you need to scan your topology to find specific instances and specific versions of specific technologies, that's something that you can do now with that DQL. You can use the DQL to actually get near real-time understanding as to what is in fact actually being seen within your environments. This is super exciting because, as we live in a world of microservices running within containers, and these things are very ephemeral. They have very short lifespans. They can exist for a very short period of time to deal with some sort of business process and then be deprecated just as fast. Having that near real-time understanding really allows organizations to get a handle on these workloads, whereas in the past, you might have missed some of those entities being spun up, some of those containers being spun up, because they didn't get captured within a traditional sort of scanning process for your CMDB. So this actually opens up a whole slew of really different, interesting use cases for Dynatrace. So Brenda, I'm really happy that you took some time to walk us through this particular piece. Keep going, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonesy. And thanks for adding that extra detail into it for sure. Awesome. So, with all this data coming into Dynatrace, you may be thinking, okay, let's build a dashboard out of it. Let's put all the data in there. But there's something really important inside of Dynatrace, and that's our AI named Davis. So I know all the rage today is AI. It's in everything. I even have it now in my Snapchat app, something I never thought I'd have AI in. But this is something that we've had since our newer generation of the Dynatrace platform came into existence. So what Dynatrace will do is, with all of the data coming from different sources, it's not just going to correlate it. It's actually going to look at all that data and say, okay, are these things related? Is it a symptom or is it a root cause? And actually, it will start generating what we call problem cards. So I've opened one here that looks into a user action duration degradation, which essentially means that there is a response time increase. And the first thing I always like to highlight is this sentence here. The current response time, approximately 2.1 seconds, exceeds the auto-detected baseline of 400 milliseconds. So what Dynatrace is doing for a lot of the data that comes in, especially transactional data, the code level data, and real user monitoring data, is it's going to auto baseline for your application. So gone are the days where you install a monitoring tool or an observability tool, and you have to discern what is normal for your application. Does the landing page take 5 seconds to load normally, or 2.5 seconds to load normally? Dynatrace is going to detect that because no two applications are the same. So rather than having you go in and configure all these thresholds, which of course you can still edit these based on deviations from the baseline or static thresholds, but we recommend trusting the Dynatrace AI and really seeing that it is powerful and very useful in saving you time. So you're spending less time on configuration and more time analyzing and innovating. So that's something really awesome from the AI. And something also that I like to highlight is, with the Smartscape topology, if I zoom out, there's a lot of circles here. There's a lot of interdependencies. As Jonesy mentioned, there's a lot of ephemeral workloads. So that's a lot for a human to analyze. And in the top right here, you can see Davis actually analyzed over 18,000 monitored entities for this problem. And as opposed to the traditional war rooms where all of the resources for, say, a network or a database, or the code level, and saying, okay, it's not my fault, it's not my fault. Davis is looking at all those and saying, okay, which one is the symptom and which one is the root cause. So now, you can still analyze this, but Dynatrace is actually pointing you towards the root cause of the issue. So in this case, we can see it was actually due to a deployment event, which pushed out some bad code. And we actually have this enriched with ServiceNow. So not only do we have a service graph connector to ServiceNow to say, okay, update all my entities, it also realizes that there's tickets that are being raised inside of Dynatrace, and we can then send them over to ServiceNow and apply them to the correct teams. So, it could be applied to a development team, it could be applied to a infrastructure team, whatever the relevant alert is about, if it's about resource constraints or response time increases, failure rates, things like that. And something really cool about this one is it actually has a remediation tied to it. So they went one step further. Not only are they raising it in ServiceNow and raising a ticket, sending it to the appropriate team, but they're handling it in a more automated fashion. So they're actually going through and saying, okay, this deployment was unacceptable in terms of a response time increase. It didn't meet our SLOs. It's causing issues for the customers. So we're going to roll back that deployment with an Ansible job. And you can see the approver and everything. And you can actually go and play back this issue in terms of, okay, how was my problem evolving over time? And seeing when that Ansible job kicked in, you can see it was back on the mend there. So something really cool before I drill down more into that root cause is a lot of the time you get asked, can you recreate the issue? Can you share your session with me? With Dynatrace, that'll all be included in the problem card. So if I hit this play button here, you can start to see things light up in red. That check destination service that had the code issue is impacting all of these other entities. And what I'll do is I'll pause, say at the height of the event here. And you can see there's 45 different ongoing events in 11 components. Now, even if we take the smaller number there and say, okay, you were going to have 11 different monitoring tools or observability tools for the different processes. You've got a Tomcat, Apache, Nginx. You've probably got infrastructure monitoring on top of that, real user monitoring for the application. And all of those alarms, bells, and whistles are going to be going off because there's an issue with your environment. So what Dynatrace does is recognize that they're all related to the same thing. It's all due to this check destination code push. So it's going to summarize that in one problem card, in one ticket, as opposed to having 11 different tickets. The appropriate team is notified, and the other teams can also be notified that their application or their entities were impacted, but you know who the root cause is, they know who it is, and they're on it fixing it. So really cool to see the visual resolution path, and it kind of just visualizes just how it decreases those alert storms, as well as potentially war rooms and gathering everyone together, because you have this single source of truth now. Everyone is looking at Dynatrace for all of their observability data, whether it's logs, network information, code level information. The teams can share exactly this link, and everyone would be working off of the same information. So it's really valuable in that sense.
Yeah. Brendan, just before we move on, there was a question that popped up there. And that last question was, can we explain the root cause section a little bit more? Which card is the real cause, the top one, the bottom one, that type of thing. So, typically in this particular scenario, the on the root cause side, over on the right-hand side, what we'll do is we will show one of the entities that, if there's multiple entities, we'll show multiple entities. But then you've got below this, the different, in this particular case, the deployment event, right, that Brendan walked us through. Below that is, in this particular case, this is the response time degradation event. Now, what Dynatrace's AI does is, when we show a root cause in a problem card, we're showing the entities that are impacted, and then we give additional detail, but typically you have to drill down into that additional detail. And so perhaps, Brendan, why don't you take a moment and actually walk us through how this analysis button right here points to where, the particular issues are.
Yeah, perfect. That was actually just where I was heading. So perfect question. Great segue into that too. So say if I click on that analyze response time, and of course, if this was failure rate, it would be looking into the failures instead. But say for response time, you can see there's no interaction with queues, no database usage, but rather the service execution. And you can see that's split into suspension. So we can look at the memory if anything's waiting, and code execution as well. And you can see the response time. It's normally right down here, but it actually ballooned up quite a bit. So if we dig deeper into the method hotspots, and we can get these because we're doing bytecode injection, we can actually click down and see what methods are causing that response time increase. So then we can pass these back to the developer, or they're already looking at this page and saying, okay, I know where to look when I come in the morning. The problem has already resolved itself, but for our next deployment release, looks like we need to retune or refactor this method in a way that doesn't impact the response time. So it's really good at identifying what the root cause is and where you need to look, and going from there. I really like this graph here as well, because that splits it into code execution, logging, waiting, I/O for network and disk. So really great details on that.
Very cool.
And
Very
if I
cool.
click back into the
I
problem,
think we've got another question. We've got another question
Sorry,
that just sort of popped up here. Any specific version on Node.js? We use legacy code, Angular 9 on some apps. Would that be okay? So, this question comes up all the time about, our technology support. And what I've done is I've actually asked, the masters back in the control room to actually paste into the chat window here a link that you can go to that actually describes all of the different technologies that we support. So Dynatrace, it has a very extensive list of technologies that we support. As a matter of fact, if you were to go into, say, the Dynatrace hub, there's probably over 500 different technologies that we support in some fashion. So that was a great question. And, let's just take the time to sort of acknowledge that, hey, there are a lot of different technologies that are out there. My suggestion would be is go have a look to see if it's supported within this list. And then also, to be fair, folks, sometimes give it a try. Like Dynatrace, ultimately, you can spin up a free trial whenever you like. You can very easily deploy a Dynatrace agent and just literally see if it picks up the technology that you're looking for. More often than not, we will 100% be able to grab the technology process metrics from that particular technology, and then depending upon the different version, if it is something that is still supported by that vendor or supported by that community, more often than not, we'll support that as well if it requires deeper instrumentation. But that's a great question. Thank you for that. Okay, Brendan, what about what else do we got here?
Awesome. So the last part of the problem card that, of course, I always want to show is the real user monitoring portion of it. So, of course, we install an agent, we monitor the infrastructure, the back end, and yes, we do detect network problems as well too. What we'll do is capture the packets, pull out some information, and throw the rest of the packet away. So things like TCP connectivity, any connections drop, things like that, we will detect as well. We can't necessarily install on, say, a router or a switch. So what we do with those instead is actually ingest the logs. And that's something that's been sort of our power play over the last year, is how we analyze logs. I'm definitely going to expand on that more, but yeah, network problems are definitely identified as well. Good question.
So actually,
So
hold on. Let's
yeah.
let's just talk about that a little bit more, detail around that one too, because it is an excellent question. So as Brendan mentioned, the agent does do a little bit of network detection. There is a small component of PCAP that is going on. What that allows us to do is it allows us to understand at both a host or a server level as well as at a process level what host is talking to what host. It also allows us to understand what process is talking to what other process. At the host level, if you have multiple NICs or network interfaces, we'll be able to actually see traffic broken out by the different NICs, these interfaces. So even if you have a situation where you're using virtual interfaces like a VPN, Dynatrace does a very good job of being able to say, here's the traffic that's coming across that virtual NIC as opposed to this physical NIC on that machine. So that's just what the agent is doing at the network level. In the Dynatrace hub, there are a number of different extensions to Dynatrace that you can add to your Dynatrace configuration that can connect to a whole wide variety of different network devices. And so this could be anything from your Cisco routers to your F5 firewalls to your Gigamon switches. There is just a tremendous amount of connectivity for us to be able to literally add to Dynatrace. And so once you do that, once you start adding that context, that makes that Davis AI even smarter because now it has more data to work with. So that is an absolutely fabulous question. And we just want to make sure that if you're talking about connecting through the extensions, that's one aspect of it. There's another option, which is simple, generic SNMP. So for example, if you want, if you've got MIBs that you want to start, ingesting, metrics into Dynatrace using SNMP, you can do that as well. So there are just a whole wide variety of different options to get that network information into Dynatrace. So, SNMP traps, the extensions, the one agent, and you can see in that Smartscape how we are tracking the actual traffic as it's going from process to process, from host to host, from service to service. So fabulous question. Thank you very much for that. Okay, Brendan, keep going.
Awesome. Thanks for the elaboration. No, that definitely gets down into the exactly how to, right? Awesome. So the last part of the problem cards here that I like to show is the business impact analysis. So this relates to that real user monitoring aspect of it. So when we install an agent on a server, it will actually identify if it's a web server. And that will go into the real user monitoring view of things. It will inject a JavaScript into the web page. Now, of course, you don't need the agent to do this. There's other ways we can do it, either through a Chrome extension or agentless from, where we edit the web page directly if we can't install an agent. So there are other options for that. But the information that you get from that really helps the teams in terms of triaging and understanding from a user experience perspective. So what I've done is I've actually clicked down on this button here, which gave me a bunch of different sessions to choose from. And of course, I chose one that had a lot of information here. So, by default, it's going to have everything at the top, the IP address, what operating system they're using, the browsers that they're using. So you can see if there's an issue with Chrome versus IE versus Firefox, things like that. But you could also pull out more information if you know where to pull it from. So you can see with our demo travel application, Easy Travel, we're pulling out, okay, they want to go to ancient Greece. And we're actually pulling out a revenue amount from the web page as well after they've checked out. So now you can track your revenue and track travel destinations, track all of this data inside of Dynatrace. So it becomes, as well as an observability tool, business analytics as well, and a full view in just one place. So if I scroll down, what you get is a timeline of what the user did on the application. So you can see there was a full page load on the home page and going into different XHR actions. So if it's a single page app, we can monitor those. and it will show exactly what was going on that page in a full waterfall breakdown. So say if I drill into here, what this is going to show is a full breakdown of the page with all of the W3C metrics. So if I hover over, you're going to see all the different phases it took in terms of loading. So you can see, okay, is it on the processing side, which is the server side, or is it on the client side? Or was there any errors that occurred? Maybe some things were stuck in pending. We see that a lot here. So Dynatrace is going to give you a wide breakdown as well as information into what of all of these are. If you're not familiar with time to first byte, DOM complete, first visual content paint, all of those wonderful metrics that may be held to KPIs in terms of loading, as well as recommendations on those findings. So going from a higher level of what was my user doing on the application into, okay, what exactly slowed them down or what exactly stopped their transaction on my web page. Gets really into good information there. And if I go back one page, there's actually one more tab here that I love to show called Session Replay. So what this does is replay the session that the user was actually doing. So if I hit the play button here, we can see it took some time to load the page. And I know this is quite small in terms of the text that is sharing on the page, but some of it is start out in those spaces there, especially when you enter credit card data or any PII data, you want that to be masked as well. So there's a lot of data privacy controls inside of Dynatrace and a lot of flexibility on what a user can and can't see. Does it even come into Dynatrace in the first place? But it gives you this really good view of understanding, okay, there was an error and annoyance on this specific page here. So if I minimize out of that and click on this, it's going to bring me to that action. And then again, I can do a perform waterfall analysis, where that's going to give me the full details of the page, what was taking a long time. And if I wanted to drill into the back end, it's also going to give you what's called a service flow. So this is, we saw the smartscape in terms of just seeing the wide array of what everything's talking to. This is an actual transaction traced through the different application components all the way down to the database. And I happened to just glance over and see that there was a question about databases. So say if I go down, it's got that full path there, and I'll just click on the first one. Live demos, let's do it. So what you can see here is that transaction as it was traced through all of the different application components, all the different technologies, likely not on the same server, but that's all traced, and all related into one transaction. So on the database side, we can actually see there was a statement here and gives a summary on exactly what it was, how many times it executed, the timing it took, things like that, and any logs associated with it as well. I'm not sure if this one has any. Nope. But if it did, it would be associated there as well. So definitely get down to that level of information.
So actually, Brendan, I think the question on the database side was about explain plans. And so folks, let's take a moment to just talk about what we do on the database side. So first off, what Brendan's showing us, this view into the database, this is based upon our introspection of the ADO.NET or the JDBC connections to the database from the application side. So it doesn't require any instrumentation whatsoever on your database. We're actually looking at the calls that are going out to the database from the application and then basically just assembling this information as part of this. This is, frankly, honestly, really, really cool, specifically if your database exists up in the cloud. If it's like a cloud RDS instance, as an example, you're not getting in there to really instrument it at all. There's no way of really being able to do that. So this gives you really good visibility of those calls and statements being made out to the database. And it's super useful when you're trying to diagnose those classic N+1 type problems. What do I mean by that? developers, like anybody else, are, they're pressed for time. And sometimes what they can do is they can take shortcuts where they might make a call to the database, not understanding how other developers might be calling their code that's going to be called the database. And so what happens is a simple request turns into 10, 20, 100, and quite literally this past week I saw somebody where it was up into the thousands of requests back to the database from a single transaction. So that classic n+1 problem, Dynatrace does just an amazing job of being able to say, oh, hey, you know what? This particular transaction is really trashing your database. You should have actually made that call once, stored that, as an object so that you didn't have to go back to the database all the time for that particular piece of data. This is a perfect example of that. Now, as it comes to the explain, something like an explain plan, there are, again, in that Dynatrace hub, extensions that allow us to connect to the databases themselves. And in some cases, some of those extensions actually do allow us to get access to those explain plans. But that is extension by extension. And so that's not going to be the case for every single database that we support. Also, what we do is if you are running the database on some infrastructure that you can instrument, so not necessarily up in the cloud as like an RDS instance or a Cosmo DB in Azure, if you're actually running the database on your own infrastructure, the infrastructure that you control, you can place the Dynatrace One agent onto those machines to actually monitor the infrastructure, the actual database processes. So there's a number of different ways that we can get great metrics out of the database. But that was a great question on the explain plans. Thank you very much for that. And so, Brendan, let's just actually take a pause here for a second, because we actually have a pile of questions that are all queued up.
Awesome.
Let's get into them. Here's a great question. So if I install Dynatrace inside my Kubernetes cluster, does it monitor all the applications installed from inside the cluster? What do you think, Brendan?
I'm going to go with yes.
So this is actually a perfect opportunity, Brendan. Why don't we flip over to the Kubernetes views and actually show folks exactly what we can do there.
So looking at the Kubernetes view, and I'll clear my filter off. Let's look at the last 30 minutes as opposed to that problem card. So of course you can view data that's outside of the time frame. But of course, let's look at ones that are relevant. This one has 69 namespaces. That's quite a bit. So let's look at this, looks like OpenShift cluster here. So it's going to give all the details inside of your cluster, the different workloads, the pods, namespaces. We also look at the vulnerabilities if you're looking at the AppSec module. So, all of it is done through the one agent, and you can deploy that as an operator, as a daemon set, so it gets automatically instrumented as things spin up and spin down, because as things are automatically scaling or things like that, you don't want to have to manually instrument it every single time. So we can definitely cover that off in an automated fashion. As well as getting all of the Kubernetes events. Some really cool things that I know we alert on is, say, pods stuck in pending, and detecting all of those different Kubernetes states. So say, yeah.
Oh no, I was just going to add to what you were saying there, Brendan. So it's interesting, folks. That Davis AI, it actually is designed to look for very specific problem patterns within your Kubernetes deployments. So, things like, Brendan had mentioned a couple of examples, but things like umkill events. Umkill events are like really hard to kind of diagnose, right? And that is an exact type of pattern that, Davis, that AI, will be able to point out that, hey, here we have an application that we can't get it to stand up because it keeps failing because of these umkill events, umkill being out of memory. So in that particular case, it's typically related to a configuration issue. And so this is a perfect example of the type of value that Davis AI brings to a Kubernetes environment. And from what we've been seeing is these Kubernetes environments, the types of workloads are insanely complex. And just monitoring them, trying to manage them just with simple infrastructure metrics alone on dashboards, that it really is doing a disservice to most organizations. You are certainly not getting a lot of value out of that, or as much value as you could if you took a more automated approach like what Dynatrace is providing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
What
sure.
are you showing now? My screen is so tiny right now.
Yeah, so what I've done is actually click down into some workloads just to show you, some information that we would show in case you haven't seen these pages before. It's similar to what we'd show for, regular services or infrastructure metrics as well, where you get the CPU, memory resources, and more information into pods and actually Kubernetes services. So say if I clicked into this Kubernetes service, we could look down into the events and logs. Looks like this one's not quite as not quite as populated. Let's see, look into one of the containers. And again, you get all this plethora of information and a view into all the different processes that are running inside of that container as well. So this is where we get down into that deep code level visibility. So you can see this process isn't monitored, so there's no services associated with it. But you can actually see there's 7 different processes that are calling into this container. You can see what it's running on in terms of the host and the pod as well, and get all of the good information from Kubernetes. So we can pull this in by default, as well as any other metadata information or logs or events that are relevant as well. So there's a plethora of data inside of Dynatrace, and it's usually just a click down away.
So here we got a question, Brendan, off the top of your head. Do you know the answer to this? Metric events, are these consuming DDUs? I'm going to go out and limit. I believe the answer is yes, that they would consume DDUs. So folks, let's take a moment there to just talk a little bit about what do we mean by DDU? It's to be frank, it's actually Dynatrace jargon. Okay, this is something related to the operation of the Dynatrace platform and how specific functionality could be, is in fact actually monetized. So, and this is how things are licensed. And, a DDU is a measure of license consumption for Dynatrace that is associated with things like ingesting data. So if I'm ingesting log data, as an example, if I'm ingesting metrics, if I'm ingesting events, these all consume things like DDUs. Off the top of my head, like I said, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I'm pretty sure that the answer to that is yes. And Brendan, what do you think?
I think so as well. Yeah, I believe so.
All right. So Brendan, we got like 10 minutes and wait. Okay, yes. So here we've got someone noticed about our support for CouchDB. It supports only to version 1.x. Actually, I think that the control room and there's the one agent extension. So there's actually a little bit more documentation that we can actually probably forward to you. So we had the control room paste that into the chat window here. So here's some sort of, in this particular case, some more information about that support for CouchDB. So again, thank you for that question. Let's just keep going. Do we have any other questions, or we got 10 more minutes and we haven't even covered, there's probably a bunch of other things that you want to cover, right, Brendan?
Yeah, especially the UI changes. But one thing while we have it on Kubernetes is just to show, say if I come to the hub here and I type one agent, what it's going to do is direct you on different ways to set up here. So say if I want to go the Kubernetes route, it's going to give you a YAML file that you can deploy and apply. So really straightforward. Say if you want to do it in a traditional sense and deploy on Linux, you just do a wget or download the one agent, pass it on to the server, you verify the signature and run the installer. So just kind of want to highlight the different ways that you could deploy it, and we keep it fairly simple, or as simple as possible. Awesome.
Oh, we're getting some push from some folks that know things. In this case, show us this new service UI page.
Absolutely.
Let's actually go into that.
If I want to look at the services page here, so this is looking at really the backend requests of the server. So say if I want to go with my Easy Travel customer front end, for example, these would show all the backend requests. And you can see, thanks for trying the new design page. I had it turned off just in this analysis. So instead of having these infographics, all the information will still be there. You can drill down to look at the service flow, or the traces in more details. So what you can do is actually switch to the new page design here. And if you don't like it, you can also always change back by returning to classic page with these 3 dots, and give feedback on that as well, just so you know, so you're not trapped. But say for all of those Kubernetes and metadata information, that will still be shown here in the properties and tags. There's no problems. There's 3 SLOs. And there's something newer called ownership that you can actually apply as well, assigning responsible teams for the services and infrastructure, all the different entities. But it's really the information laid out in hopefully a better way. So, you got your response time for your services and all the different metrics, looking at failure rates, throughput, the time spent, waiting for other calls, things like that. And if I scroll down, you can highlight your requests by marking them as key requests. They're the most important ones. And as well as more information into what exactly is calling and making or being called from this service as well. So you can see it's making calls to a CouchDB. It has incoming calls from an Apache service. And if I keep scrolling down here, a view into the traces, events, and logs as well. So it's really a nice new view that we hope is more compact and more useful. So rather than having to click down and filter on this key request, instead I can just do this drop down here and analyze it right from the service page. Whereas before maybe I would have to go to top web requests and filter more on these. So hopefully this is more useful in terms of the data it shows.
So, what this is also an example of, folks, is the new unified design model. So slowly over time, Dynatrace has been moving all of the different entities to a much more unified look. So that if I'm looking at a host, if I'm looking at a process, if I'm looking at a service, that has the same consistent look and feel. And it just makes it easier for people to adopt Dynatrace, because no matter what I'm looking at now, that look and feel, the way that it works with the call outs on the right hand side, it's just a much easier way of letting people get access to this data with the snap of the finger, so to speak.
Exactly.
So we've got like maybe 5 minutes left. Brendan, maybe do you have an opportunity to just drop us into the logs and events for a second and just explain what's going on there?
Absolutely. So in the classic page, as well as the new UI that we have for Dynatrace, we have this logs and events page. So what you're able to do is have a unified view of all your logs, and you can filter that either in the default way. Say if I want to look at a specific namespace, Kubernetes namespace prod, for example, and status set to error. Just so showing a relevant example there, and run that query. So you can see we get a list of all those logs. But something also really cool that Dynatrace does is we enrich the logs with the trace ID. So not only are you looking at it from a log side, you can click down and view from a trace side, or if a user session, if there's real user monitoring associated with that, you can look at the particular action that caused this log line as well. As well as any metadata that may be pulled out of there. So, just showing this view because it's one that people may be familiar with. It was in our classic UI, but something that is really useful for logs in our new UI is this Notebooks app. And I actually have one up as an example here where, say if I come back and I show just advanced modes. So we have the Dynatrace query language, or DQL, and we have comparisons to Splunk, SQL, other log querying observability tools. But we have our own language that says, okay, fetch logs. We're going to match the namespace prod and status as error, and we're sorting it by timestamp. So you can choose to do it by this or just by the simple ones. But as you get more familiar and comfortable with it, you'll come into these notebooks and play around more. So what I'm doing here is focusing on the log level error, the namespace prod, and I'm just looking at a count of them and saying, okay, I have a total of 170, but I want to visualize that over time in a chart. So what I've done is actually summarized it by 5-minute timestamps. And of course, what you can always do is change the visualizations. So say if I want to make this into a table, I could sort it by the counts as opposed to doing it by the timestamps and seeing, okay, so the most time of the day that we get the errors is actually in the morning or the afternoon. Or I could leave it as a line chart and just look at the trends there, as well as actually dig into that data as well. So in this example, still pulling from the same place, but now I've specified I only want these 5 or 6 fields here. So I'm looking at the data of what we see here in this content, but just in a page in this notebook. So say if I scroll along here, you can see the log source and an entity and a trace ID if there was one associated with it. And you can actually click down from these as well and do explore, open, and view the host. So in the same way that we were seeing the services there, you can see the host data here. Really cool stuff. So in terms of logs, we're doing really powerful things in that when we ingest these, Dynatrace didn't know what I was going to search for. So there's no indexing, and I can just pull out the data that I'm looking for on a whim. So say if I want to pull out errors by IP, if I want to create business events. So say if there's an event called deposit money on our Easy Trade demo application, what we're able to do is split that out by the different credit cards and see which ones are performing based on that, and how much revenue is coming in. We could also use it to audit Dynatrace, making sure that people are using Dynatrace as they're supposed to. They only have access to what they're supposed to. Of course, with the PII and private data, we want to make sure that people are only accessing what they're supposed to. But in a more interesting way as well, you could pull, say, an AWS instance cost analysis where, okay, we're pulling the different instances by teams that we're looking at, and we want to sort them by instance hours. And then I know I'm speeding through this a bit as I know we're tight on time, but what we're doing is actually pulling the rates for those different instances. And then we're combining that to the different teams that are running them with JavaScript. So you can see that's combined there. And then we do a little bit more JavaScript in order to chart that and see, okay, which team is actually using AWS the most. And then once you have these visualizations in the way that you want them, you can actually apply them to a dashboard. So, these new dashboards, this data is all coming from the logs, and you can actually have emojis in which has a check mark if it's meeting an SLO, has an X if it's not, and get all of this plethora of information on one dashboard. Even the 1-star reviews that you might not want to read. So really cool stuff in terms of what we're doing for the logs. Really powerful. Yeah.
Super powerful. I know in the future, getting to know Dynatrace, we're just going to have to spend way more time on that because there's just so many different, value points that this, allows us to, address. So folks, listen, we are now up against the top of the hour. I see there's actually a list still of questions that need to be answered. We really do appreciate those. We'll try our best to, well, actually, you know what? Let's just take 2 minutes and see if we can't blast through a couple of those questions. I saw there was a question there about Fluent D. So, with Fluent D, the question is, how do you make use of Fluent D to get Atlassian logs into Dynatrace? So Dynatrace actually has a log ingest API. And in a scenario like that, you would use Fluent D, which is effectively a log forwarder, log shipper, to basically push those logs into the Dynatrace API. Now, if your instance of let me just say it this way. If your instance of your technology is something that's running on your infrastructure, you can automatically actually forward those logs into Dynatrace using the Dynatrace One agent. So the One agent itself is a very effective way to allow you to ingest logs and have a bunch of really powerful processing capabilities on top of that. The second question was, do you need to install in a Kubernetes environment? Do you need to install a container, a one agent in every container? And the answer is no. You don't need to install it in every container. What you do is you would deploy the Dynatrace One agent as an operator. That Dynatrace One agent will actually, if you were to actually go in and look at it, you would see effectively a container which would be the Dynatrace One agent. But where the really interesting thing that happens is that deployment with that operator will still insert the monitoring extensions into the code running in your other containers. And that allows us to get that visibility into the actual code that's running within the containers without having to deploy a one agent on every single one. So great questions, folks. We're over time. There's so many questions that you guys brought us this week that we have run out of time. That's what makes Getting to Know Dynatrace so special. Brendan, thank you so much. That was an absolutely stellar, fabulous demo. I loved all of the different topics that we covered today. And folks, as always, what makes Getting to Know Dynatrace so special are your questions. So thank you for those questions. We absolutely loved them, and we love doing this, and we're going to continue to do so. So we'll see you next time on the next Getting to Know Dynatrace.